Hi and welcome to this video tutorial on using the node editor to simulate a brushed metal surface. Now, got a picture of a pair of salt and pepper shakers here, and the thing that makes brushed metal look like brushed metal is, one is obviously the grain, which we can see here is going cylindrically around this object, but more importantly it's how that grain changes the appearance of the specular highlights and reflections. Now, this type of effect is also known as anisotropy, which is a technical way of saying something has independent direction, and you can see that on the specular highlights. They're longer vertically than they are horizontally, and the same thing with the reflections, and both of these properties as a result of the grain are also slightly blurred. So that's the effect that we're going to try and simulate. Now I've got a simple scene with a test object on a ground plane. It's lit with backdrop radiosity, and I've also on the texture environment plugin got a gradient going from light blue to white. And if I show you the render as it is, we've also got a area light just over the top left of the object to give us some specular highlights. So straight into the surface editor, we're just going to concentrate on this main sphere. So select its name and make sure that nodes are active by clicking the little checkbox and bring up the interface. Now, the thing with the node editor is there is more than one way of doing any particular surfacing task. So this is just one particular way, and a lot of people head straight for the material nodes and the conductor whenever doing any sort of metallic surface, as that's what it's designed for. However, we're not going to use that. We're going to use these red inputs down here, these shading channels. And the way that they work is whenever you plug anything into them, so if I bring up a reflection node, that node then overrides Lightwave's default way of shading that particular channel. So if I set this node up, this scene's very simple. There's nothing actually anything in there for it to reflect, so we're going to change this from ray tracing and backdrop to ray tracing and spherical map, and then set a HDR image for the object to reflect. Now, this is where a common mistake happens with some of these reflection, some of these shading nodes, and that is you set it up and you see something happening in the preview here, and you think, okay, that's all ready to go. So you hit F9 and you don't see any reflections, and you sort of bang in your head wondering why. Now, if I bring up the interface again, you'll see that on this particular node there is no setting for saying how reflective this parameter is. I can't set it to be 10% or 100% reflective. There's just nothing there. So for this particular node I have to change the amount on the reflection here. Now I can either do that in the reflection input on the layered surface editor, and if I turn that up you can see something happens, but we're going to keep this an all node affair. So I'm going to just plug in a constant, not a constant vector, a constant scalar, which is just a number. So if I plug that into the reflection channel, you can see something now happens. If I bring up the interface to this, scalars basically go from 0 to 1. So 0% is obviously 0 and 100% is 1. So it's basically divided by 100. So if I wanted it to be 20%, then I can either go 20 divided by 100, which gives me 0.2. Same result, just a different way of getting there. So now if I hit F9, we can see some reflection happening. Now, not all of the nodes require something plugging in to the other channel. An example of that is if I go to the diffuse menu and bring up the RNI shader and plug the output of that into its corresponding diffuse channel and double click to bring up the interface, you can see that we have a diffuse setting. So if I leave that on 100, I get that, and if I change that to 20%, I get that. So you can see that this particular node has a way of controlling that. So it's just worth remembering that particular point when using these shading channels down here. So if we look at our reference image, first thing to do I think is get in the grain, as that's the most sort of obvious parameter. So a number of ways we can do that. You could try a 3D procedural texture and change the scale to be longer in the X direction than in the other two. But the problem with the procedural textures, especially for brush metal, there isn't really one that gives nice linear streaks. So what we're going to use is an image map instead. So bring up the image node, double click on it, and change the image from none to well, I've got one here, brushed tileable. And if I just edit the image and show you this, now this was created in Photoshop using the add noise filter and then streaked motion blur streaks in the X direction to give me a perfectly tileable image. So set that. I want to turn off pixel blending because I don't want it to smooth out these streaks too much, and I also want it on the Y direction, and I want it to be not spherical like you would think, but actually cylindrical. So I also want to bring down the scale because 1 meter is way too big. So let's try 10 centimeters and close that down, and then I want to drag the color into the color channel on the surface node over there. Now if I hit F9, we can see that the image map is now mapped to our object. The problem is it's a little bit dark and the streaks are way too pronounced, so let's just adjust that. So bring up the properties again. So I want to change the opacity of this image map down from 100% to, let's say,